Good afternoon from Helsinki. I'm out in Itäkeskus today, um, at the tail end of summer. In Finland, um, about mid-July, people start talking about the end of summer and that we have to prepare for the change in the light and the change in temperature and feeling and mood and everything. And today is a gorgeous day. Today is an absolutely gorgeous summerish day. It hardly ever got above 25 degrees this summer. We had some lovely, lovely days, and of course, the the never-ending light for a few weeks. But but alas, there's a lot of jokes about as soon as like mid-July hits, it's like well that was nice. Anyway, I've been wanting to do this poem of Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott is becoming, I think, I always admired him since I started reading him in the 90s, but just recently, in the last 2 years, I've reread a lot of his stuff, and I didn't realize how masterful he was because he's not at all flashy. He has some phrases that absolutely stick in your head, but it's just the volume and the consistent high quality that strikes you. And then so he's always at this high bar, and then some of them reach in their density, rhythm, image. It just is it's just off the charts. And so I was really struck when I read Forest of Europe again this winter, and I was going to do one of these videos, and then I got so many. I went into so many directions with it, and it also resonates because it's about well, the average person as well as the poet's response to living through tyranny and political oppression, which I don't know why that would resonate in the last 6 years, but he's talking about historical events, and it kind of in the same way, even though it's a very different art form. I was thinking about how James Baldwin, the American writer from the 20th century, said that um, reading Russian literature, especially Dostoevsky, made him feel that he wasn't alone. That this angst, oppression, trauma, systemic issues that he faced is just the human condition. Suffering goes on, and it's our responses to it. Even in the doom, there's always doom and glory somehow, and there's a comfort in it, in knowing that your suffering isn't all that special. It's just the way things work in this realm, in some ways, and then you can transcend it. But what also struck me about this is he's talking about poetry as if it still mattered. He wrote this probably around 1980. Um, different world, still Cold War. He wrote it for his friend Joseph Brodsky, who was, of course, exiled Russian poet. And then he mentions um, Osip Mandelstam, who was a poet um, who died in exile, who was exiled twice because um, Stalin cared too much about his writing. And I was like thinking about, like, isn't that amazing that not all that long ago, like, world leaders actually cared about what poets wrote. Like, I don't think anyone, leader or common person, cares at all or reads poetry. I was in there's a great bookstore in the center of Helsinki I've been going to for over 30 years. Love it. Love it. They have a good selection of books, but I love it mainly for the atmosphere and the architecture and the cafe. But alas, I was looking through the poetry section. Everything, so I, I can't read contemporary poetry. It's so horrific. And then I just decided to pick up some anyway. And it's completely tone deaf. It's not even prose. It's awful. And it was like, isn't that amazing that 100 years ago or thereabouts, that poetry could get you exiled because it was so powerful and true, and now it's just everything's trivialities, and people have lost sense and sensibility. But anyway, and Mandelstam said, and this ties back to uh, the poem "Forest of Europe" from Walcott, that is there anywhere else where poetry is so common a motive for murder? He said only in Russia is poetry respected. It gets people killed. Um, and it's like isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing that that words could matter? And it was like we need to get back to a world where words matter. And it's like it's not an elitist thing at all. It's just it's how people transmit um, ideas, even some mundane ideas, cultural information, folklore, mythology. It's vital for society. And in this poem, Force of Europe, I'm going to read it eventually. I'm already in 6 minutes, but he mentions it. One of the best stanzas. He mentions how, um, and I use this. I use this often in writing and speeches. There's no harder prison than writing verse, but it's also a phrase men can pass from hand to mouth. Like it's how you transmit feelings, history, emotions, um, and as James Baldwin said, it's like suffering, and it makes it somehow better, I guess. We'll see about that. But anyway, I'm going to do the Forest of Europe, but I also wanted to read one of Mandelstam's poems. It was one of his last poems, I believe, before he died in exile in Siberia. It was like the second time he was exiled. And he knew he was dying. He knew his health was deteriorating. I think this was written in 1937. And he says it's so touching, and it plays into the idea of Forest of Europe, but Walcott's poem is a little bit more filigreed, I think, and also a little bit less dramatic, but still containing, all these feelings of being in exile and standing up to tyranny, and if you can't do anything about it, yeah, it's like yeah. Robert Bly said the same thing. Poetry's not going to change, the insanity of empire or whatever it is, but you need to record it because it ties into your own um, higher self, your own consciousness, and transmitting that into whatever future of humanity there is. That if they look back on your era, they'll know that not everyone was asleep, something like that. And so Osip Mandelstam says, and I was alive. He says, and I was alive in the blizzard of the blossoming pear. Myself I stood in the storm of the bird cherry tree. It was all leaf-like in star shower, unerring, self-shattering power, and it was all aimed at me. What is this dire delight, flowering, fleeing, always earth? What is being? What is truth? Blossoms rupture and rapture the air. I'll hover and hammer. Time intensified and time intolerable. Sweetness, raveling rot. It is now. It is not. I read that better because I've been um, trying to do this one for so many months, and I'll record a few, and then I'll hate the way that I sound reading it. But I just wanted to. But today I'm just like I just need to get this done, and so that's the sentiment I have. But this whole raveling rot, sweetness, raveling rot. Like I wrote pages and pages about that one. Well, it's just like 3 words, phrase, whatever, and it's just the whole context of the poem is stunning because you realize like poetry was life for him, and it had so much greater significance. But he also clearly had a sense of irony and humor, and um, the absolute flowering of the moment when you know that you're facing incredible oppression, your health's deteriorating, you know you're going to die, and you're like, well, I'm going to write a it's like I'm going to write a poem called "And I Was Alive." Anyway, and also the bird cherry tree came up. I was thinking about bird cherry trees. They're is a fascinating thing because they're like the cherries that people like, but they're specifically for birds because they're so sour and bitter, and such a dramatic contrast to the cherry trees um, that we like. They're just for the birds. Anyway, that wasn't very profound, but I was going to leave that in. Um, so I'm going to do this poem by Derek Walcott, the Saint Lucian poet who spent many years in New York and Boston as well. Um, Definitely post-colonial, um, pride of Saint Lucia. I you know, it's not too profound to say, but yeah, when I was in San Lucia a couple years ago, that's how I got to thinking, oh, I should read some more Walcott. And then it surprised me that I always remembered him as just being kind of like middle of the road, interesting, high quality, but nothing really, really deep and profound. And then now I have a completely different view of him. I think he is exceptionally profound, and just how, just like how Coleridge described poetry, it's just like the best word in the best order, whereas prose is just the best, not the best of the best, but decent words in decent order. And whereas it's poetry, well, like Emily Dickinson said, it has to in some way rip the top off your head, but um, but just this idea that that it's set, it's clear. Each word builds on another. The images, the rhythm, the tone, and there's not a word misplaced, right? I mean, that's another way of saying it, I guess. So I'm going to do Forest of Europe, which now has overtones of, global events of the last few years, but then it's always interesting how he pulls this in so many different directions, and that we all have this intense joy in sharing in suffering through geographies and centuries. It's like Forest of Europe for Joseph Brodsky. The last leaves fell like notes from a piano and left their ovals echoing in the ear. With gawky music stands, the winter forest looks like an empty orchestra, its lines ruled on these scattered manuscripts of snow. The inlaid copper laurel of an oak shines through the brown bricked glass above your head, as bright as whiskey, while the wintry breath of lines from Mandelstam, which you recite, uncoils as visibly as cigarette smoke. The rustling of ruble notes by the lemon Nieva, under your exile's tongue, crisp under heel, the gutturals crackle like decaying leaves. The phrase from Mandelstam circles with light in a brown room in barren Oklahoma. There's a Gulag archipelago under this ice where the salt mineral spring of the long trail of tears runnels these plains as hard and open as a herdman's face, sun cracked and stubbled with unshaven snow. Growing in whispers from the Writers' Congress, the snow circles like Cossacks round the corpse of a tired Choctaw, till it is a blizzard of treaties and white papers as we lose sight of the single human through the cause. So every spring these branches load their shelves like libraries with newly published leaves, till waste recycles them, paper to snow. But at zero of suffering, one mind lasts like this oak with a few brazen leaves. As the train passed the forest's tortured icons, the flows clanging like freight yards, then the spires of frozen years, the station's screeching steam, he drew them in a single winter's breath whose freezing consonants turned to stone. He saw the poetry in forlorn stations, under clouds vast as Asia, through districts that could gulp Oklahoma like a grape. Not these tree-shaded prairie halts, but space so desolate it mocked destinations. Who is that dark child on the parapets of Europe, watching the evening river mint its sovereign stamped with power, not with poets, the Thames and the Neva, rustling like banknotes, then black on gold, the Hudson's silhouettes. From frozen Neva to the Hudson pours, under the airport domes, the echoing stations, the tributary of emigrants whom exile has made as classless as the common cold, citizens of a language that is now yours. And every February, every last autumn, you write far from the threshing harvesters folding wheat like a girl plaiting her hair, far from Russia's canals, quivering with sunstroke, a man living with English in one room. The tourist archipelagos of my South are prisons too, corruptible. And though there is no harder prison than verse, what's poetry if it's worth its salt, but a phrase men can pass from hand to mouth? From hand to mouth across the centuries, the bread that lasts when systems have decayed, when in his forest of barbed wire branches, a prisoner circles, chewing the one phrase whose music will last longer than the leaves, whose condensation is the marble sweat of angels' foreheads, which will never dry till Borealis shuts the peacock lights of its slow fan from L.A. to Archangel, and memory needs nothing to repeat. Frightened and starved, with divine fever, Osip Mandelstam shook, and every metaphor shuddered him with ague, each vowel heavier than a boundary stone, to the rustling of ruble notes by the Lemonieva. But now that fever is a fire whose glow warms our hands, Joseph, as we grunt like primates, exchanging gutturals in this winter cave of a brown cottage, while in drifts outside, mastodons force their systems through the snow. So I've been sitting with that poem for 6 months, and I still feel the energy from when I first reread it. It was probably was January, and it just struck me in new ways, given the experience of the last several years, and also just how he builds on these small noticed moments, images, and so much of it is mundane, but if you read it in the right light, it's one of those poems that brings everything together. And I could write many pages about how it works and how it links the grand and the mundane, the some of the worst moments of history with just kind of like contrast to the landscape and this um, feeling that um, no matter what, um, the important thing is um, like crystallizing these reflections in a way where you can transmit it without shouting, um, without calling too much attention to your own sufferings, as James Baldwin might have said. And but the important thing is that we find some register, some music, some um, beauty in and amongst um, the horrible sweep of history. That wasn't very profound, but it's you could go in so many different tangents when you read something that deep and profound, and yet you can also read it. The words are beautiful enough that you don't have to like think too deeply about what he's saying and think too much. You understand that what he's saying is something um, he's been able to take this material, this essence of life, and into something that is enduring and that can hold those um, images, feelings, and reactions to your own little worries as you go through a pleasant afternoon in Helsinki. Anyway, I'm rambling and I'm probably not making any sense. I think I need to spend more time writing about it, but I wanted to just rattle off a little bit of what has been preoccupying me. I'm writing a much longer piece about the experiences of the last 6 years, and I love how that poem has kind of like drawn me into maybe writing it on a different level than I started the piece at first with all this emotion. Anyway, hope you have a beautiful, wonderful day wherever you are, and I will be continuing the poetry series. Thank you so much.